Welcome up Dr. Mike Heiser.
That was good. Okay, my topic today is, as you can read, Sons of God and Biblical Prophecy. A guy was saying in his talk earlier, he sort of alluded to the fact that I don't really like to do prophecy, and he is absolutely correct. I just have this thing about prophecy because I don't like any of the systems. Having taught theology, having taught all this stuff, I know where all the weaknesses are at, and it's one of those things kind of like, I can remember a Star Trek episode with Captain Janeway saying, I swore when I was in the academy I'd never get into time travel. I was going to avoid all those paradoxes. I feel the same way about prophecy. I swore that I would never go to a conference and do prophecy. And here I am. But I'm going to try to do, prophecy, but I'm also going to approach it in a way that I feel comfortable with, and I also feel it'll be most beneficial. I think that when it comes to this topic, specifically the sons of God, as it relates to prophecy, what prophecy is really about is, establishing the kingdom of God. We all know that. As Christians, it's a familiar sort of phrase, buzzword you hear. But there's a subplot. It's also about, and I want you to catch this because this will be helpful as we go through, and I will try to remind you of it as we go through. It's not just about establishing the kingdom. It's how the kingdom is established and in what manner the kingdom is established, and what are the obstacles, what's standing in the way of the kingdom establishment. What's the subplot? I believe, personally, that the subplot is the kingdom is established by and for the sons of God, and Christ is their leader. There are the good guy sons of God. And when the kingdom is established and is in the process of being established since the first advent, there's what's going on, what I call displacement, that the true sons of God, the sons of God now, who are faithful to God, who are unfallen, who are loyal to Christ, are replacing those sons of God who have fallen and defected, essentially, from the family of God and who are under punishment. And so there are two lines that the story of the kingdom is about. And with that, let's just jump in here. The phrase, sons of God, we're going to take a little tour through the Old Testament as far as what the sons of God, who they are, what the phrase means, and, catch this, similar phrases. These phrases here, B'nai Ha-Elohim, B'nai Elohim, B'nai Elim, and B'nai Elyon, this is sons of the Most High. It's a similar phrase, but we know in Psalm 82:6, there's a reference to the B'nai Elyon, the sons of the Most High. They are called Elohim, the plural Elohim, in the first verse of that chapter. So they are divine beings. But every place in the Old Testament, and you've heard this before, where this phrase, this exact phrase occurs, and this one, every place where these phrases occur, the referent is a divine being. Whether you want to call it an angel, a lesser Elohim, a lower God, little God, whatever phrase you want to use, they are not people. Now, there are those who try to get people into those passages. You have a really tough time with this one because this is the plural of El, the name of God. Elohim becomes a proper name. But you've really got a tough time trying to fudge your way out of it. Now, I have some of these as aqua, and I think for sure these passages are talking about fallen B'nai Ha-Elohim, and the other passages could go either way. That's sort of a minor point, but just so that you know why I have that there. Psalm 82, 1 and 6, if you're not familiar with this, God, the word is Elohim, stands in the divine council. In the midst of the Elohim, he passes judgment. This one has to be singular because this verb in Hebrew is singular. This one has to be plural because of this preposition, kerev in Hebrew. You can't be in the midst of one. Okay? It's logically impossible. Go down to the sixth verse where God is addressing the gods of his council, the other Elohim, and he says, you're gods. I said you are gods. You could translate this, I thought or I presumed you are gods. Sons of the Most High, there's the other phrase, all of you. And then the next verse says, but you're going to die like men. You're going to die like Adam, either Adam or humankind No matter what view you take there, it works to create the contrast between the human and the divine. Now, what is it with these sons of God? I'm going to suggest to you that before there was humanity, before there was creation, it was God and the sons of God. If you're familiar with my divine counsel work, the servants are the malachim, the messengers, what we think of as angels. God has a family. You need to think of the council in two ways, because Scripture addresses the divine council, which is the host of heaven, in two ways. It's called a council because there's bureaucracy going on. It's also referred to in family terminology. And that's going to become important for our session today. God has a family. All these beings are created except for the Son, the capitalized Son. And I did this last year about how the Son, we know that the second person from the Old Testament shares the essence of Yahweh, and he's thus uncreated. We're not going to go back to that. You can get the DVD or go to my websites for that kind of thing. But I'm going to suggest to you that God, from the very beginning in creation, this is Genesis 1, 26 and 27, got the idea, again speaking in human terms here, because God never has ideas. He knows everything. God got the idea, so to speak, that, you know, this earth that I've just created, why don't I expand my family? Why don't we create humankind on the earth, let them administer the earth, subdue it, steward it, and they will be part of our family, of my family. This was God's original intent, to make us like Him. Now, we have this thing, the image. The image is something that makes us like God. I've spent a lot of time at Ancient of Days talking about the image. Based on a point of Hebrew syntax I won't bore you with again, the image refers to a special status. It's not a thing put in us. We are God's imagers. We are created as God's image. The little Hebrew preposition be, bet, in, functions just like our English preposition. In can mean more than one thing. If I say, I put the dishes in the sink, denotes location. I smashed the glass in pieces, denotes result. If I say I worked in education or in medicine, it means I worked as, in the capacity of, a teacher or a doctor or a nurse. This is what it means here. We have a special status. We are God's images. He creates us as His image to function physically on earth, to do our job as though He were here physically. Eden, I spent a lot of time with this, was the chosen meeting place of the council. There are descriptions of Eden that match descriptions of the divine council throughout ancient Near Eastern literature, especially Ugaritic, which is Canaanite. The fall interrupts this plan, though. God wants to expand His family on earth. He wants us to be like Him. He wants us to be divine. This is the original creation intent. If you run into someone who's Gnostic in their worldview, they like to say, well, you know, God, you know, just didn't want humanity to be divine. That's just bogus. That was the original intent, to make us divine. But God had a plan and a procedure for doing that. It's interrupted by the fall because Adam and Eve disobey, and that creates the emergence of two lines of divine sons. You have, according to the curse in Genesis 3, where God says, I'm going to put an enmity or an adversarial relationship between your seed, He's speaking to the serpent, so you have the seed of the Nachash, and between your seed and the seed of the woman. So you've got a seed of the Nachash now come up in an adversarial relationship against the seed of humanity. And humanity is cast out of the garden. They are no longer able to eat of the tree of life, to sustain their immortality. There's a punishment. But God, instead of destroying Adam and Eve, which is what the Nachash was thinking He'd do, it was the whole intent of the plan, begins a process whereby the serpent's seed, the Nachash's seed, will, yes, grow and become more numerous, become adversarial to the humans, but they will also be defeated and will be displaced as the humans, the human divine seed, the ones that God intended to be part of His family from the very beginning, as they are brought back into a right relationship with Him. So it's a long plan that extends from the result of the fall, but you have two lines emerge. Genesis 6, you have the seed of the Nachash again. Now, I'm not saying that every time this phrase, and it does occur more than once in the Old Testament, I'm not saying every time this phrase shows up you have like hybrids or anything like that. Seed of the Nakash is usually just the enemy of God's people. There are certain military guys in the Old Testament who are trying to defeat Israel who are called the seed of the Nakash. Jesus says, you're like your father the devil, speaking to the Pharisees. He's not standing in front of a crowd of reptilians, okay? He's speaking to the Pharisees, but what he's saying is you're God's enemy, and you're the enemy of his children. And he makes it very clear. In this case, we have the whole hybridization situation, the result of which, of course, threatens this plan, God raising up a redeemer from humanity who would undo the effects of the fall. So that Genesis 6 is a special situation. I'm not going to go through this. I believe that the Nakash was not a snake. I believe he was a divine being. If you want to talk to me about that, we can bring up this slide later. We're going to skip that. You have the two lines, again, converge and interact and be split apart in Genesis 10 and 11. Now, this isn't very obvious unless you've seen the previous talks I've given here and other places. Genesis 10 and 11 is the Babel episode. We learn from Genesis 32, 8 and 9, which I think might be, yes, that's the next slide. This I have highlighted for a specific reason, and the blue underneath here. Most of your English Bibles, except now for the new RSV and the ESV, English Standard Version, say that when the Most High divided up the nations, divided up mankind among the nations, he divided them up according to the number of, most of your English Bibles say B'nai Yisrael, the sons of Israel. However, the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Septuagint have the sons of God. God dividing up the nations according to the number of the sons of God. Now, going back here, this is echoed in Deuteronomy 4 and some other verses I'll show you. What essentially happens is, after the flood, God's trying to work with humanity again. They resist obeying his command to disperse, be fruitful, and multiply. They build a tower instead to make a name for themselves so that there'll be some great reputation. God says, hey, this isn't what I wanted you to do. If you're not going to follow me, fine. I'm going to give you what you want. I'm going to give you your independence, but it's not really independence because I'm going to punish you by putting you under the dominion of sons of God, some of my lesser deputies. And they will rule you. They will be your gods. These are the ones you want to follow. You're going to get what you want. And God then says, enough of humanity. I call it the Romans 1 event of the Old Testament. God gives them up to what they want, gives them over to their own devices, which is why in the very next chapter, God starts his family over with Abraham. Now, more on what I call the Deuteronomy 32 worldview. Here it is in English. Divides up the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. But the Lord's portion, an important term, is his people. Jacob is his allotted inheritance. Again, the call of Abraham to raise up Israel. So the rest of the Old Testament is God versus the gods, the fallen sons of God, Israel against the nations. That's pretty much the Old Testament in a nutshell, which is why, as Guy mentioned earlier, when they go into the land, they specifically target areas that are populated with Nephilim descendants. And they go by a variety of names. We won't get into that. Deuteronomy 4 was the parallel passage to this, where the sun and the moon and the stars and all the host of heaven, again, he refers to them, I think this is, oh, there it is. He says, you don't be drawn away and bow down and serve them who the Lord your God has allotted, same verb as in Deuteronomy 32, to the other peoples. Hey, they belong to each other. Don't you, Israel, follow them. They belong to all the peoples under the heaven, but the Lord has taken you and brought you out of the iron furnace, out of Egypt, to be a people of his own inheritance. Again, the same root as in Deuteronomy 32. The passage links the sons of God, who are Elohim, with the sun, moon, and stars and the host of heaven. Other texts do the same. This is somewhat, I'm going to go through this quickly because this should be familiar. Job 38, morning stars in parallel to sons of God. Again, star, sons of God. The Lord sitting on his throne. This is a classic divine council scene in 1 Kings 22. The host of heaven is standing beside him. Has to refer to divine beings, not just, astronomical phenomena. Nehemiah 9, God creates them. Deuteronomy 17, continuing with this idea that God is dispensing with the world, dispensing with the nations, putting them under the sons of God. They're now the seed of the Nakash. Everybody on the planet, God is saying, I'm giving over. You want to worship these are their divine flunkies, go ahead. I'm going to take my own people out of here. out of Abraham by my will, by fiat, and I'm going to create my own line. If any of you want to come over here, you have to go through Israel. That's why Israel's called a kingdom of priests in the Old Testament. He says, again, to continue with this motif, that if there's found any among you within the towns that the Lord your God is giving you, a man or woman who does what's evil in the sight of the Lord your God, transgressing the covenant, and he goes and serves the other gods and worships them, the sun or the moon or the host of heaven, which I have forbidden, don't do that. They obviously fall, though. They went and served other gods and worshipped them, gods to whom they had not known, and catch this phrase, whom he had not allotted to them. This is God's decision to punish the planet for not following him. It's two lines. It's the seed of the Nakash, the enemies of the people of God. Well, the people of God don't exist anymore. Genesis 10:11, there was no Israel. Right. That's why he calls Abraham and creates one. And the Old Testament is these two peoples, those controlled by the fallen sons of God and those who will be the sons of God, those whom God makes the sons of God, those who follow the true God. More verses that connect the starry host with divine beings. Genesis 12, again, God starts over. I'm going to go through a couple verses now to show you that right after, or that demonstrate the intent of Genesis 12, to create a divine human line that would follow God, that would be part of his family. Again, by faith. We all know Old and New Testament theology. But you'll see curious references to this as you go through the Old Testament. Exodus 4, this is when Moses is before Pharaoh. You shall say to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord, Israel is my firstborn son. I have said to you, let my son go, that he may worship me. Now again, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you that sons of God are divine beings, but they're also people. And there are good ones, those who are in God's family, and there are fallen ones, those who have chosen to not be in God's family. Either the heavenly ones who rebelled, or the peoples of the earth that God, yes, they initially disobeyed, but God cursed them. God provided a way for them to get to the other side, and they've rejected it. They have made the fallen ones their gods, and they worship and serve them. So you've got two families, and the terminology is important because it's linked. Hosea 11:1, when Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I have called my son. Okay, this is the Old Testament passage that Matthew quotes later and applies to Jesus. The Old Testament, it's speaking of Israel. Deuteronomy 14, you're the sons of the Lord your God. Don't do this, that, and the other thing. Sons of the Lord your God. Jeremiah 3, God speaking, I said, how I would set you among my sons, speaking to Israel. They're about to go into exile and get their butts kicked by the Babylonians. I thought you would call me my father and would not turn from following me. Surely as a treacherous wife leaves her husband, so you've done to me. It's interesting here, you have, again, more family terminology applied to the same group. But for the sake of our discussion here, I want you to notice the sonship language. Hosea 1. This is after, he's speaking of what's going to happen after the exile. He says, yet the number of the children of Israel shall be like the sand of the sea, which can't be measured or numbered. And God says to Hosea, in the very place where it was said to them, you're not my people anymore. In other words, God curses Israel, sends them into the exile. In the very place that I said that, it shall be said to them, children of the living God. God's going to bring them back into the family. Daniel 7, you have more of this humans as divine sons language. Now we're familiar with this passage. Thrones were placed. Again, this is a divine council scene. Notice the plural. The court sat in judgment. I saw in the night visions, behold, upon the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man, one that looked like a normal human being. That's what the term means, human one. To him was given dominion and a glory and a kingdom. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away. His kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. Then later on in the passage, you see this, that when the beast or the four kings shall not arise out of the earth, but the saints, this is kedoshin, kedoshe here in construct in Aramaic, the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom of Pharaoh. Wait a minute. I thought the Son of Man gets the kingdom. And down here we have the saints, the holy ones, getting the kingdom. Okay? Hold that in your mind. Daniel keeps going. As I looked, this horn made war with the saints, prevailed over them until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was given for the saints of the Most High. And the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. Well, what happened to the Son of Man possessing the kingdom? Who are these saints? Later in the passage, the court meets again, the council meets again, and his dominion shall be taken away. This is the little horn, which we identify as the Antichrist, to be consumed and destroyed to the end. The kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the holy ones of the Most High. Their kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. Singular. Here's what's going on. These are prophecies. This is Daniel 7 about the end of days. He's saying, look, the kingdom of God is going to have headship, him, the Son of Man. We know who that is. It's also going to be shared by the holy ones, which if you look at Kedoshim in the Old Testament, intertestamental Jewish literature, there are lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of places where it refers to the upright, the holy sons of God, divine beings who are still faithful to God. And then we have the people. Hold those thoughts in your head when we get to the New Testament. God's kingdom, led by the Son of Man, given to all these individuals, it has always been God's intent to rule through his counsel, and he originally sought to make humans his children alongside the sons of God. To that end, this plan has been opposed by Satan, those sons of God who defected. It has also been put off by God's own punishment. There you have the Genesis 10 Babel incident. In the New Testament, this distinction between holy ones and Christians is blurred, and I think deliberately. We'll get to a few examples. Let's see, in a moment. The church now displaces Israel as the family of God, or comes alongside them. The New Testament worldview has Satan as the god of this world. The entire world is ruled over by fallen sons of God. These are New Testament terms. Rulers, the Greek is archons, which is an important term. Principalities, powers, thrones. Now those who follow the Son of Man, Jesus Christ, are the new true sons of God, destined to replace the fallen sons of God. This is why the New Testament refers to us as being adopted into God's family. The adoption language of Paul is very important. Believers are the sons of God. We displace, as Christians, there will be a moment in the future when we are glorified and we become what was lost. But there's going to be a battle over that. The old sons of God are not going to go easily, and they're not going to take it lying down. Just a few references, John 1:12. We're called the children of God, 1 John 3. I love this one. See what kind of love the Father has given us that we should be called children of God? And so we are. In the Greek it says, and that's what we are. As if John has to punctuate it and say, get it in your heads. Okay? We are God's children now. Galatians 3, we're sons of God through faith in Jesus Christ. If you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. This is the whole point of the New Testament. Old Testament Hebrew, holy ones. In the New Testament, holy ones, hagios, is the same term used for Christians, and it's usually translated saints. It's the exact same term from the Greek to the LXX back to the Hebrew. Romans 8, and here we take a prophetic turn. Because those who are led by the Spirit of God are the sons of God, Paul says. He's explaining, about salvation and all this kind of thing. Talks about the spirit of sonship. You receive the spirit of sonship. By him we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are God's children. If we're children, then we're heirs. Look at this again, family, heir, inheritance, language. We are heirs of God, co-heirs with Christ. Now he says in verse 19, the creation waits in eager expectation for the sons of God to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, so on and so forth. Again, children of God, the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. Pains of childbirth is a phrase that's often used in the Old Testament for the coming of the day of the Lord. We think of it as Armageddon, birth pangs. We await eagerly for the adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. So this phrase down here, Paul is saying, look, here's when this is going to happen. Here's when the sons of God are going to be revealed. When we are fully adopted and our bodies are changed. In 1 Corinthians 15, he refers to this happening in two ways. One at death for the believer. The other is at the end. If you remember the book of Revelation, when the Battle of Armageddon is about to be pitched and just gets started up, Christ returns, and who's with him? The hagioi, the saints, the holy ones, which in New Testament terminology are, divine. I'm going to show you that it's both divine beings and human beings, Christians who have been made the sons of God. When will they be manifest? When will the creation be redeemed? Again, the day of the Lord, the time of the end, which culminates at Armageddon. Here are a few Old Testament passages that are the backdrop to Revelation when Christ returns with the holy ones with us. Zechariah 14, a very famous prophetic passage. This is when the Messiah sets foot on the Mount of Olives and it splits in two from east to west and so on and so forth. Right when this happens, in conjunction with this event, then the Lord my God will come and all the holy ones with him. This is Old Testament, not New. And after that happens, in conjunction, same chapter, it shall be, Jerusalem, Israel shall be inhabited. There shall never again be a decree of utter destruction. Jerusalem shall dwell in security. That becomes an important prophetic term, as we'll see in a moment. A couple other references, Joel 3, bring down your warriors, O Lord. Again, referring to the day of the Lord again. Proclaim this among the nations. Isaiah 24, the Lord shall punish the hosts in heaven. Catch this. And the kings of the earth upon the earth. Okay, here's a phrase. The hosts of heaven in heaven, that's one group. The kings of earth upon earth. Okay, the kings of the earth. Upon the earth. Does it refer to just the kings getting punished on earth? Or might it refer to the hosts of heaven getting their just deserts on earth? Now, I'll tell you how the people at Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls, interpreted that. If you've ever seen the War Scroll, this is the reason why, and I believe they were correct, that the final battle, Armageddon as it were, is a pitched battle between humans and divine beings on both sides. It is not just humans battling it out, it's both. Matthew 24, powers of the heavens shall be shaken. Again, going back to Isaiah 24, God's going to punish the hosts in heaven. Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man. All the tribes of the earth will mourn. The trumpet call, so on and so forth. Again, the Lord returns. Now, my position summarized. I think that God's counsel family has suffered defections in the past. Some of these are fallen and imprisoned. Others are not. Dave alluded to that with the whole Watchers and the demons thing in Enoch. It's also in New Testament here. God had always wanted humanity to be part of the council, his own sons, his family. The fall broke that up. God gave the nations over as a punishment. A new family was created, Abraham, Israel. Christians are co-heirs, joint heirs with Abraham, making them the new sons of God. Humanity will become divine like him. 1 John 3. We shall be like him when he comes. We don't know what that means, John says. We're going to be like him. We won't be him. We're not going to be like, little Yahwehs, okay? But we're going to be like him in some way at his coming. This plan is opposed by the fallen sons of God. And I'm just going to suggest to you that Armageddon is about these two sides. God's family, that he started it with Abraham, and the family that defected or rebelled, going at it. Now, the day of the Lord, the second coming of Christ, there are three aspects to this. There's the regathering of Israel, peace and security for them. Judgment of the nations, where the Lord God of Israel and Christ is recognized as Lord over the earth. And there are evil spiritual beings judged and imprisoned again. I have Ezekiel 38 and 39 in red for a reason. And that reason is, here's my prophecy chart. Actually, everyone would agree with the basic elements here. But I do admit it's premillennial, so, But that's about the only thing I'll commit to. Genesis 6, where we have the Watchers imprisoned. 2 Peter echoes that. They are what I call the first generation Watchers, the original offenders. They are in prison. Tartarus, the Abyss, it goes by a whole bunch of names. Second generation Watchers are the ones, as Dave alluded to today, when the Nephilim were killed, the immaterial side, the quote, spiritual side of a Nephilim was free to roam the earth, and Enoch calls them Shedim, demons, but he also calls them Watchers. Just point blank, kind of like father, like son sort of thing. They are free to roam the earth. The incarnation, the first advent, when Christ comes for the first time, I have Satan cast out of heaven here. Now, I don't think that Revelation 12 was completely fulfilled here. You have to say it was fulfilled in part because Jesus himself says, and it's a great moment when he says it. He says, I saw Satan cast from heaven. It's Luke chapter 11. He says that at the same moment where he sends out his first group of disciples to reclaim the earth. Guess how many he sends? 70. Guess how many nations there were back in Genesis 10 and 11 if you count them when the earth was put under the sons of God? 70. There's 70 nations there. At Ugarit, this is cuneiform, but it's ancient Syria. They have a tradition of the divine council as well, and they actually have texts in tablets that say the number of the sons of God is 70. Just point blank. I don't think that's a mistake. Jesus says, go get it back. And then he says, I saw Satan fall from heaven. I mean, that is the beginning. This is the beginning of the end. But it's going to take a long time. Now, Revelation 9, we're moving way up here. I believe that Revelation 9 describes the release of the Watchers, these guys back here, and we'll go into a little bit why. They join with these guys at Armageddon, okay, and they are defeated and imprisoned for 1,000 years. Revelation tells us this. We have an earthly kingdom. They're let out and destroyed. I think Gog and Magog actually get fulfilled. If you want to know what my view of cyclical fulfillment of prophecy is, get my book Islam and Armageddon. I take 4 or 5 chapters to explain that. There's no way I can condense it here. Questions to be addressed. In light of this chart, questions. What evidence is there that links to Revelation 9 of the Watchers? How about that it takes place at the Armageddon, or just prior to Armageddon? What connection is there between Satan, Revelation 9, and the Watchers? And what about the Antichrist? Here's Revelation 9, if you're not familiar with it. I saw a star fallen from heaven to earth. He was given the key to the shaft of the bottomless pit. In Greek, it's the abyss. He opened the shaft of the bottomless pit, and all these creatures come out. They're described here. It's the demonic locust horde. They have as king over them the angel of the bottomless pit. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek he is called Apollyon. The first woe has passed. Behold, 2 woes are still to come. There's a 5th angel in the book of Revelation. In this episode, there are 7 angels, so there's 2 more to go. Keep that in mind. Let's just talk about the abyss, though. The locusts come from the abyss, which is part of the place under the control of Satan. Now, Satan gets cast to earth here, but a curious thing in Semitic languages, including Hebrew. The word for earth, eretz, is also used for Sheol. Now, I'm not saying that hell is earth and earth is hell. I'm saying that hell, in the Hebrew conception, was literally, if you look at Hebrew cosmology, under the earth. Okay? It is part of the planet. That's why you have this wordplay. The abyss, though, was apparently the bottommost part, the bottom of hell, the lowest depths. Part of Sheol, but the abyss was a especially low place. Sheol was the place of the departed dead, especially the spirits of the dead Rephaim, who are giants in the Old Testament, those whom Enoch calls demons and watchers. So you have 2 groups. You got one group that's imprisoned in the abyss. You got other 2 that can come and go as they want. They live, quote unquote, that's their headquarters in hell, in Sheol, but they're free to roam the earth. Here you have some verses that discuss that. Isaiah 14 connects Sheol to the Rephaim. Again, these are giant clan Nephilim descendants. Job 26, the dead. The word is actually Rephaim. Your English translation is just horribly obscured here. The Rephaim tremble under the waters and their inhabitants. Sheol was viewed as a watery abode and a fiery abode later. Sheol is naked before God, and Abaddon has no covering. You notice Abaddon here is not a person, it's a place. In Revelation 9, the place sort of gets personified in this one being. Luke 8, same thing. Jesus asked him, what's your name? And he said, we're Legion. This is the famous episode with the demoniac. For many demons had entered him, and they begged him not to command them to depart into the abyss. If you send us home, it's okay because we can get out. If you send us to the abyss, we're toast. Okay, we're not getting out. They beg him, don't send us there. Ezekiel 32 I have in Hebrew for a reason. If you go to your English Bibles, it will say, you can write down the verse if you want to look it up later. They do not lie with the Gibborim, Genesis 6 forward. They do not lie with the Gibborim, the Nephilim, the uncircumcised Nephilim. Nice slap in the face there. The uncircumcised Nephilim who came down to Sheol. This is just another verse that connects Sheol with the Nephilim, with, again, the giant clans. Septuagint has gigantes, giants, right here. Your English Bibles will point this in such a way that it reads, they will not lie with the Gibborim who have fallen. Okay, so it obscures a reference to the Nephilim here. The locusts of the abyss have as their king the angelic being Abaddon. He is directly from the kingdom of the dead. He's personified in Revelation 9. We have two verses that discuss this. The idea of a king of the abyss accords well with Satan. May not be Satan, but it very well could be. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Watchers were also known as the spirits of the asp, a serpent, who resided in the pit. Pit is the word for the abyss in Isaiah 14, which is where Lucifer goes when he falls. So I'm giving you, these aren't the only verses I could put up here, but this is a smattering to associate, to triangulate. Revelation 9, Watchers, Satan, abyss, pit. My own view is that this is the release. It happens just before the second coming. We know that because of the seventh angel's trumpet. 2 angels later results in the kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ. Revelation 9 is just before the Lord comes back. You have a release of the Watchers to do battle. Antichrist as Watcher and hybrid Nephilim. What about that? This is a little complicated, and prophecy, of course, is complicated. I'll try to go through this and not obscure important details for our purposes. The Antichrist, Antiochus IV, fulfills a lot of what's expected of the Antichrist in the book of Revelation. Obviously, he's living well before the book of Revelation was written, well before there's a church. Antiochus, we don't have a Christ yet, but he's called an Antichrist figure because he mirrors what's going to happen in Revelation. He is, again, the great enemy. He's from Syria, which is in the north. Hold on to that. The Antichrist is in typological agreement with Daniel 11 when Antiochus comes from the geographical north to invade Jerusalem. The Antichrist is also related to a mythological or spiritual theme. You notice this word and this word are the same. Hebrew north, Tsaphon, is the same as this Tsaphon. This is the place where the divine council met, and specifically where Baal, the great enemy in the Old Testament, held his council. Okay, he is the great Satan type. Mythological Tsaphon is identified in Israelite religion as being a northern location in several places associated with the Watchers and the Nephilim. The key place where this happens is actually Bashan. Very important place for understanding where how the two lines in the Old Testament are viewed and what's going on. Bashan is located in what was variously the tribal allotment of Dan and was the realm of a Rephaim race. Deuteronomy 3 tells us that. By the way, what mountain is in Dan and Bashan? Hermon. Mount Hermon from Dave's presentation, the place where the Watchers descend. Okay? Bashan in Hebrew means serpent. In Ugaritic, sorry for the typo, in Ugaritic the region was known as Bathan. They had a dialectical difference, which means the place of the serpent. Are you starting to get the picture here? Early Jewish writers held that Antichrist, the great enemy of the Messiah, was expected to come from the tribe of Dan. This was based on several verses. Dan will be a serpent. The Hebrew there is Nakash. We've seen that before. By the roadside, a viper along the path. About Dan, Moses said, Dan is a lion's cub springing out of Bashan. Again, this is about a curse against Israel. Interestingly, Dan is excluded from the list of the 12 tribes of Israel in Revelation. He doesn't belong there. Gog and his hordes come from the heights of Tsaphon in Hebrew. Familiar place 2 slides ago. Tsaphon, the north, and the place of Baal, where Baal holds counsel. When it's all over and the evil ones are defeated, I like this phrase, the good guys, and the birds actually here, get to feast on the fat beasts of Bashan. I thought I'd throw that in there because it's just, it's a dig. Ezekiel 39 again, after the battle of Gog and Magog. I have which one because I actually think there's two that follow the typology here. This is really interesting. All the people of the land shall bury them, Gog and his hordes, and their fame will spread on that day that I display my glory. This is God speaking. Declares the Lord God, and they shall set apart a standing commission of men who shall pass through the land and bury any who have passed on. Those corpses remain on the surface of the ground in order to cleanse it. This phrase is actually a single word in Hebrew, ha'ovarim. It literally means the travelers, hence it gets translated those who pass on. But the ovarim in Ugaritic texts are Rephaim. They're the remnants of a giant race, or at least a race that comes from the Nephilim. So you might have a good eschatological connection there with Gog. Does this suggest that the Antichrist and Gog are the same being? I don't think they're the same being, or they watch your hybrids. I think they follow in each other's footsteps, typologically. Gog is called a Nasi Rosh, chief prince. This occurs several times in the Dead Sea Scrolls for a fallen divine being. Okay. Hebrew phrase, by the way, does not mean prince of Rosh, for reasons of accents and the fact that grammatically parallel phrases would be nonsense. The Kohen HaRosh, it's chief priest, not priest of Rosh. Okay? It doesn't mean prince of Rosh. It's the chief priest. And it's a title that gets associated with an evil divine being in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Antichrist is called the son of destruction, Apoleios, not the same as Apollyon, but they derive from the same root. So he is the son of Apollyon, basically the son of the guys who live in the abyss, which are evil, demonic, watchers. You also have Nephilim, who that's their home base. It's where they wind up. Okay? It's their HQ. Antichrist is the beast, and he's said to come from the abyss. I mean, how much clearer could it be? It's assumed by those who would object to some of this that Antichrist is only a man on the basis of 666 because it says that's the number of a man. You could actually just translate it human number, and Dave could tell you more about this. Human numbers as opposed to perfect numbers or divine numbers in Gematria, there are different classifications. Let's just put it that way. And by the way, if you go back to Revelation where the number is given, he says, figure this out. Figure this out, this wonderful mystery of this number. And then he gives you the number. Okay, why does he do that? Because the number means something. And it's Gematria language in the book of Revelation. Just go check out a good commentary and it'll tell you that. One last thought. In ancient times, and this is for Dave, I threw this in just for Dave. And Dave, please help me here. In ancient times, the cosmic abyss. Now, we've been talking about the abyss in Revelation 9. In the ancient world, there was a cosmic abyss, an abyss that was in the heavens. It was considered to be the southern zodiacal sky from the claws of Scorpio, or Libra, to the end, to the end of the horizon there, the Hades half of the sky. And this comes from Firmicus Maternus. The entrance to the celestial Hades was located between Scorpio and Sagittarius. That comes from Plutarch. And if you'll notice, this is the place where the Milky Way goes. And in Dave's 2012 presentation, the archer is pointing to the center, the galactic center, on 2012. This is the gateway to the cosmic abyss in the New Testament world, the Greco-Roman world. Now, does that mean anything? Well, that's where we need Dave. By the way, the altar, right here, this was considered, when you go to Revelation 9, you have the Watchers released. You have this great release of the divine enemies of God, and there's smoke that comes from the abyss. In the ancient world, the abyss was thought to be smoky because there was thought to be an altar at the face of the abyss. And you can actually, I didn't put these in here, but you can actually find passages where it talks about in certain Greek mythologies, some of the giants being offered upon this altar. It's really weird stuff. But again, this is the gateway to the cosmic abyss. Yeah, I think it's the, I don't know if it's the dog or if it's Lupus the wolf. Yeah, this is what we have Dave for. but I thought I'd throw this in for him because I thought this was striking in light of his own presentation. So that's what I have. We can take questions, or if you want to move on, it's fine. Okay. Yes, go ahead.
Could you shed any insight from scripture you're studying on a geographical location of the abyss?
Can I shed any light on a geographical location of the abyss? In the Old Testament world, the gateway to hell was Bashan. It was the place of the serpent. You will see language to that effect. You have to realize what's going on in the Old Testament. Think of your geography now. Here I'll try to do this backwards. You've got the Mediterranean over here, and you've got Palestine here, and then, of course, you've got Egypt. Palestine was essentially the whipping boy for every major power in the ancient Near East. If it wasn't Egypt, how did you invade Palestine? You didn't cut through the desert, because if you did that, you'd be really stupid to take an army through the desert. What you did is you went up through the Fertile Crescent and down into Palestine. They were always getting invaded from the north. And it became sort of a byword, it actually worked its way into Old Testament prophets typologically, that the ultimate foe they thought would come from the north. Assyria came from the north, Babylon came from the north, and they just came to believe that all of our enemies, all of our significant enemies, are from the north. If you go back before there's a monarchy that gets conquered by major empires, this is where one of the first things that Joshua is told to do. He goes into Jericho, and it's strategic. You cut the north from the south. You go into Jericho, you control the center. I mean, contrary to what Yul Brynner says, the God of Israel is a good general. Okay, you remember the Ten Commandments? It's one of my favorite lines from it. He backs him against the sea, and he said, the God of Israel is not a very good general. They don't have any place to go. So Joshua goes into the center, and then he goes north. Every place he goes north and south, if you look again, you have Nephilim descendants settled in those regions. And the northern place he tells Joshua to go directly to is in the heart of Bashan. That was viewed as the bad place. Let me just give you one more throwaway verse of what we think is a throwaway verse. When the kingdom split, you had a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. The center of worship in the northern kingdom, the apostate worship, went back to worshiping calves, just like the golden calf in the Sinai incident. And the prophets made fun of that a lot. They used to call them the bulls of Bashan, because that was the center of cultic, apostate, enemy of God worship. Jesus, when he's on the cross, he's quoting Psalm 22. If you read the whole psalm, there's this phrase in it. When here you have the broken Messiah hanging on the cross, he says, the bulls of Bashan surrounded me. But Jesus wasn't surrounded by a herd of cattle, okay? It's an obvious reference to what's going on demonically, in demonic geography in the Old Testament. But it's something that we just kind of gloss over. That's where it would have been to them. Now it moves to the valley of the Rephaim. In the intertestamental period, that becomes number 2. That becomes the location of Sheol in the intertestamental period. Gehenna, the valley of Gehinnom in Hebrew. But you get both of those.
There's a verse you showed about the Rephaim being buried under the sea. And I didn't know how to rationalize that.
You have to be familiar with ancient Near Eastern and I'm including biblical Israelite cosmology here. The world was pictured as flat but round, on top of which was a fixed dome, upon which were the stars. They were fixed. Yahweh's throne was on the top. This is why the earth is his footstool. Okay, and it has windows and pillars and all this stuff. Underneath is Sheol, and it's a watery abyss. So when the reference to the waters is actually being down in Sheol, in the lower parts.
So theoretically, an archaeologist could go where you're saying that region and stumble across it.
Theoretically, I would think if someone who's excavating in Bashan, I would expect you to find I'd expect you to find lots of Baal worship there. I would expect you to find perhaps more references to it because Ugart is right next door. They would have had writing and commerce there. I would think if somebody actually dug up Bashan, and you know, I think there's a Hezbollah training camp there now, so don't look for that to happen. I wouldn't be surprised if I were going to look for Nephilim remnants, like a skeleton, that's where I'd go. Okay.
What about a big hole?
A big hole?
The opening to the abyss, I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it. I don't think that passages like that are. I don't think the earth is literally flat and with an abyss underneath it. I think that this was the Hebrew conception of the world, of the cosmos, and we can get into why that was at some other point. But I think it's spoken of in terms of spiritually speaking, because if you look at the globe, the southern, this is why the cosmic abyss is the southern part. I think that's what it's talking about. I think it's talking about a spiritual realm, beings that inhabit that spiritual realm. When they do come to earth, they can take material form. I don't have any problem with that. But I don't think it's a literal place you'd go into, and if you're not careful, you'd fall into. Okay. Another question.
You mentioned that Armageddon would be a battle between man and angels, like the fallen angels.
On both sides.
So does that mean that the unfallen angels will be here also in this battle?
I think the Watchers are released. The Watchers are released in Revelation 9. Again, this is my view. The ones who are free, of course, are obvious participants. They are defeated, according to Isaiah 24. Isaiah 24 said, and they are imprisoned until a later time. So basically, they try to prevent the messianic return. They fail. They're put into prison again, this time all of them, including Satan, according to Revelation 20. Then that's the only time you have peace and security, okay, for Israel. This is why Gog and Magog, if you actually look up Gog and Magog in the New Testament, it's after the millennium. Okay, the terms are actually there. I think that at that point, Revelation tells us that Satan is released, and there's one more cataclysmic try at it, and it ends real quickly. That's when they're finally destroyed, cast into the lake of fire, which was prepared for the devil and his angels. Okay, that's when you get that language. So at Armageddon, I think they're all there, and I think after the millennium, they're released to their doom. And that's the end of it. Another question? Yes.
Are all during the conquest, every one of the what we call ethnic cleansing, are they all tied to this?
What you have, I have a PDF file I can send you on this. Every one of the regions, and in many cases the specific cities, if you look up the Nephilim terms, and you have to do some triangulation, you got to look up all the names for the Nephilim clans, the Amim, the Zamzumim, the Zumim, the Nephilim, the Rephaim. The Hivites might be one. The term actually means serpentine. Nobody really knows much about them. But if you look all them up and the places that they're associated with, and then sort of like plot a grid and then you superimpose it on the places Joshua went, they overlap. Now, I'm not saying that there were only, I don't think there's any way to prove from Scripture that there are only Nephilim clan people living in there, because there are other phrases used of inhabitants of those places like men, very common, generic word for man. So I think in some cases you're probably dealing with a mixed population, but you're probably dealing with concentrations. And even before, if you remember, even before Joshua gets to crossing the Jordan, I think it's God who tells him this. It's either God or the narrator says that even before Joshua went there, God used the Amorites to wipe out these specific populations, and he names them again. So it's you don't even have to be Israel. God is using other people groups to do the same thing, to get rid of them, because they are the seed of the Nachash, the immediate threat at that time in history. After they're gone, the last one you read about, that you can be sure about, is Goliath from Rephaim, is his father.
The fact that they were mixed with could also be seen with Rahab. She would obviously not be in that line.
Yeah, I wonder about that. I wonder if it's very obvious that you can have Gentile, what we'll call Gentile conversion in the Old Testament. Now, here's the big if the word Gibborim outside Genesis 6:4 and outside Ezekiel 32, those two passages accepted, if the word Gibborim means or refers to, again, a giant population, then you do have conversion because there were Gibborim among David's mighty men. Now, there's nothing in the text that makes that clarification for you, so I have to leave it in the realm of speculation, but I wonder about it. Saul, there are some connections with the tribe of Benjamin with this too, and Saul was from Benjamin and he stood head and shoulders above everyone else. You just can't be conclusive. It's suggestive, but that's about all you can say. Are we done? Okay. Another question? Yes.
What is the relationship to angels and the stars?
They were. What is the relation between angels and the stars? Go back to our ancient Near Eastern cosmology. The belief was that you had this fixed dome upon which the stars are attached. It was viewed that way because ancient people could see the stars move. Now, they're thinking the stars are the ones moving, when we know it's actually the Earth. Okay? But because they moved, they thought they were alive. Okay? So you had one of two views develop in the various cultures. Either the thing that I'm looking at in the heavens, that little dot, is a divine being, but I just can't make out the features, or the constellations are divine beings fit together, or they inhabit those places. You actually get a variety of conceptions as to what is going on here. And so in the ancient world, you often see in texts, it's just everywhere. Egypt's really huge in this area. Mesopotamia. Other than my own fond wish and guess, I don't know. Now Dave, and Dave is following Jewish tradition here about divine beings inhabiting certain planets prior to the creation and all that stuff. That's a very old belief. My answer to that is we ain't going to know until we go there, until we come up with some just proof positive, point blank, that this is there. And if that happens, as Dave would tell you, we have a very old tradition for that too, that can be traced right back to the Bible again. There's very few things in this field that the biblical text has not covered before. In fact, I'd be hard-pressed to come up with one, to be honest with you. In the back.
Sorry, can I just throw in 2 cents worth with
Sure.
regard to the stars and the angels? Patch of Karen here.
Right.
Originally, we're told that the God numbered and named the stars. And throughout a lot of the Old Testament and in the book of Revelation, it refers to the stars of God. And the stars is a figure of speech for angels. A star fell from heaven. Where it talks in Revelation 9 about a star fell with the key to the bottomless pit. It was obviously a star. Lucifer means the bright morning star, which was Venus. And then it talks about Jesus Christ in the future being the bright morning star. Many of the gods, small g, the Nephilim of prior to the flood, are named after stars and planets, i.e. Jupiter, Zeus, Poseidon, Pluto, Apollo, etc., etc. So I think these guys were actually named after stars and had stars named after them, and vice versa.
Yeah.
Of course, a lot of that would have been lost now. And this ties in with the... sorry to be butting in your,
No, go right ahead.
your talk here, Mike, but this ties in, of course, a lot with the zodiac and the planisphere of the stars from a biblical astronomy point of view, where you have Virgo as the Virgin, Leo is Leo the Lion, who's Jesus Christ, Draco is the dragon, who is the dragon, and serpent is also in the constellation of the planisphere of the stars, who is the serpent, and of course the dragon, who is the serpent, is the devil and Satan. It says twice in Revelation. So there's a lot of duplication between stars. I think personally that they're actually named after planets and stars.
Yeah,
And there's talks about seven planets, seven angels of the churches, seven stars. There's a lot of work, I think, to be done. And that's
Right, and that passage, too, is another association between, if you caught his reference there, the seven stars of the seven angels of the churches. It's another reference and re-reference back to Christians as being the holy ones, the stars of God, that kind of thing. The only difficulty you have in terms of the biblical text is, and you'll get people who will oppose this notion that Patrick's talking about and I've been talking about, and that's just in the text. There was this identification. I mean, in my mind, you just can't deny it because it's just there and it's in other civilizations. But there are passages where the sun, moon, and stars, the same phrase, the host of heaven, is just meteorological or astronomical or that kind of thing. And so people will latch onto those and say, see, it has nothing to do with it. You know, take things in context. This is why I took you through all those verses in Deuteronomy. They were considered gods. Okay, I didn't just have those up there, you know, just to like fill another slide. Okay, you can trace it right through Deuteronomy. Yes.
Be very careful here because I may offend, but I'm going to try not to. I was here last year, I saw the presentations last year, and since then I've read an interesting book, Is Jehovah MET, and I've been listening to some of this talk in reference to this book, so I'm kind of seeing things from a different perspective. I'm not saying I believe in this perspective yet, I'm just playing devil's advocate here a little bit. You mentioned that Jesus Christ was referred to as the morning star, and that Lucifer was referred to as the star of the morning, and vice versa. And I find that very interesting because the morning star is the dog star Sirius. There's connections with the Illuminati and the dog star Sirius, Syrian ETs, etc., etc. When you really kind of look at it, basically what I'm seeing is that from Jehovah down, all the way to Christ and all the way, they're all basically, based on your concept, we're seeing that all of these are fallen angels. All of them led us astray. And our whole religions are based on this fallen angel concept that were brought to us by these ETs that pose themselves as gods.
It's easy. Okay, I'm going to say this at the risk of me offending, and I'm not offended, and I don't think you will be either.
Yeah.
But that is, you see it that way because that's Gnosticism. Okay, you cannot find a text that calls Jehovah a star. He is, quote, this is why Lucifer wanted to be, quote, above the stars of God. The reason Jesus is the morning star replacing Lucifer is that there will come a point in time when Jesus is Lord of Sheol, Lord of the dead, and he will raise everything at the last day. It's not that he is a Satan figure. It is a displacement metaphor. Now, but that goes back to the whole Jehovah thing. He was above the stars of God. I had Nehemiah up here. There's another verse in Psalm 33 where it says specifically that Jehovah created the stars. He, by definition, is above them. Now, if we throw religion out the window for a moment, the reason I don't think Yahweh is an ET is because if we're thinking of ETs as like everybody on the planet thinks of ETs, we have to consider them created beings in some sense. You could say, well, they might have created our universe, but by definition, you have to have a singularity point. We know this from physics, the Big Bang, the whole bit. You've got to have some creator that exists outside of creation. That creator, which the Bible describes as being in that slot, as it were, is Yahweh. So by definition, just philosophically, you can't have Yahweh be an extraterrestrial in an Israelite worldview. In a Gnostic worldview, you can, again, but you don't have any text to hang it on. And I'm not saying Gnostics don't bother with the text. That would be unfair. But I think in this case, it's a doctrine in search of a text. Okay, at least as far as the biblical material. There was somebody. Okay, go ahead. I want to make sure we don't miss somebody that hasn't asked a question.
I think you alluded a little bit to the spirits of that from the
Potential what?
Candidates for demons after the flood.
Yeah, that's Enoch.
The original sons of God themselves that bred the Nephilim.
Those are the ones who are in prison.
Okay.
Every tradition has, even outside Judaism, the Greek version Tartarus, they all get slammed and put in the slammer, as it were.
Right. My understanding is that those that were present at the flood were present at that time, but yet afterwards, Nephilim appeared in the days afterwards. I would assume that other sons of God had to come down and breed those Nephilim, that the original bodies were destroyed in the deluge. So if they were,
it's an interesting
where are
question.
they? Where would you think they might be post deluge?
There's two things to be said about this. One is that according to Enoch, there's no biblical material for this part of your question, but according to Enoch, you have the offspring, the Nephilim, when they're killed, the physical part dies. The immaterial part is referred to by Enoch as a watcher. Now you could extrapolate from that and say, if they're a watcher, and 4 chapters later Enoch says that they can take any form they wish, you can extrapolate from that, from Enoch 15 through 1 Enoch 15 through 17, and 19 verse 1. You put that together and you essentially have the new generation of watchers able to do what the old ones did. Okay. Now the other thing to be said for that is in Genesis 6:4, when it says there were Nephilim in the earth in those days and after. The grammar there is good. I get to bore you with Hebrew grammar. It's an imperfect verb following a perfect verb that is prefixed by a vav, and it's the frequentative use. Isn't that exciting? It really should be translated, there were Nephilim on the earth in those days whenever the sons of God cohabited with human women. That implies, it's always dangerous to base a doctrine on a conjunction, okay? But it implies that it's ongoing, okay? The place to go for that is that you won't see many modern commentators, because they just don't care. They're into things that really are boring. The International Critical Commentary by Skinner on Genesis will deal with that, and the Word Biblical Commentary deals with it a little bit. It's by Wenham, first volume. But you have two ways. You have two ways to approach the issue. Either the second generation can duplicate the feats of the first, or you have this whenever continuing aspect. By the way, if you really believe in you don't even have to believe in the biblical worldview to get this, but if we have post-flood literature from Egypt and Mesopotamia and the Hittites and whoever, we have post-flood literature referring to post-flood events where kingship is brought down from heaven and the gods cohabit and give us the pharaohs, give us the kings. That's all post-flood. Okay? So those texts do not necessarily, some of it's pre-flood, you got to read the text. But you actually have texts, Bible included, that say that this was happening after the flood. Now, I think that is extra biblical proof for these implicit suggestions I'm giving you as far as why doesn't the Old Testament say more about that? I think it's implied in the syntax, the verbal syntax there, but Enoch is a little more, he fleshes it out a little bit more. No pun intended. Anybody else? I know you don't have a question. You're like, oh, okay. Oh, you're just telling me time's up.
Well, we're on break almost, so Mike never quits. But the two seeds, kind of you were talking earlier, it raised the question that Rhonda Kessler's already written down for the panel. Eve and the serpent, did she or didn't she? Did they get it on? That's the question.
Well,
your view.
If you only quote half the verse like Lawrence Gardner does, then they did. If you quote the whole verse, no, they didn't. So we can. There's actually a. Well, I wonder if I have that one. I'll look for it. I may have my old PowerPoint things here. If I can find it, I'll put it. If I can't, I'll write it out for you. Okay. Yes. Go ahead. A what? You mean by supporting my favor of it? Or? Well, I think there are these divine beings, and they too take feminine aspects, and one of them is Lilith. So, I mean, Lilith shows up in the Old Testament. So, yeah, there is a Lilith, but beyond that, I don't quite know what you're asking. Oh, that.
Sexual intercourse, I mean, reading with somebody.
No, I don't. The reason the rabbis came up with that is very understandable. I'm not going to say it's logical because I don't think it is. Yeah, they're trying to figure out how two beings in a perfect environment who'd never known evil could just screw up so badly. And so they have to, what they do is they take the third character in the story and they create these relationships. I mean, there's nothing in the text that suggests this. But, you know, to be kind to the rabbis, they're trying to figure out a very difficult theological question that in this day and age, for those who don't want to just put things in the text, it really comes down to this whole predestination free will struggle. Because, you know, it's something that if God really does know everything, he would have known this was going to happen. So why did he make it happen in the first place? Why did he put, you know, you get all these questions, and part of that issue for the rabbis was solved in their mind by putting in extra characters into the story. That's a long way of saying I value the biblical text more than the rabbis, because the rabbis were just, let me be nice to them, amazingly creative. I mean, they come up with things that, like, this guy had to be on drugs. I mean, there's just no other way. It's unbelievable what they do with some things. Yes.
Yeah, I too have questions about the literal interpretation of the fall of man, because I think there is a level of allegory involved, symbolism. Because if you just follow the literal interpretation, you still got problems, because supposedly Adam and Eve were perfect.
If you restrict it to look.
Well, no, let me explain.
Okay.
Because, okay, they were born perfect with the immortal soul and immortal body, but yet they were forbidden to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But then they did, if they didn't have, this is the bottom line, if they didn't have the knowledge of good and evil, how can they be accountable for doing evil? That's a problem.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead and repeat the question.
If Adam and Eve did not have the knowledge of good and evil, and then they broke the rules, how can they be held accountable for doing something evil if they didn't have the knowledge of good and evil?
Because by definition they were told what not to do, and they disobeyed. Now, granted, Eve was deceived. Eve, by the way, is not the heavy in the New Testament. You know, and I say this as a slam against some Gnostics, because they just try to make this caricature out of Christianity that, like, Eve is just this awful person. We got to hate women because of, yeah, you know, some rabbis did that. Some early church fathers did that. I know that. You know, like, wake up and look at the text. You know, Paul says very clearly that Eve was deceived, but Adam sinned knowingly. And this is the reason why you have to have, Christ is called the second Adam, because he has to undo the effects of the first one. He's not called the second Eve. Okay, there's a reason for that. So, getting off that little hobby horse, I think that's the reason that they were given a command. They had every faculty that they needed to obey the command, and they still didn't do it. And Adam, of course, sins willfully.
Adam sinned knowingly, but he sinned by eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So, did he have the knowledge or didn't know it? You know
well, your question dealt with accountability.
Right.
Now, when he knows, I mean, how could he not know
Right.
that, that thing that Eve has in her hand with a bite out of it, you know, and now he knows in the conversation where she gets that. I mean, he knows that is what they were not supposed to do. Now, he's never experienced being in a state of rebellion. There's intellect. I mean, I can know what it means to murder someone. Okay, I don't have any experiential knowledge of that.
Right.
Okay, and I think that's not the whole answer, but it's part of it. There's someone in the back who wants to jump in here.
One more second.
I was going to help you along those lines. Is that, and you were hitting on it, Mike. Is that what that's talking about? It isn't talking about an intellectual knowledge of good and evil. It was talking about an experiential, because through in a host of places throughout Scripture, both in the Tanakh as well as the New Testament, is that to know meant to experience. To know a woman meant to experience her. To know God means to experience God. It's not just that intellectual knowledge. So they didn't have any, quote, knowledge of good or evil until they experienced evil. Then they knew what it was. It's like, I know not to put my hand on a hot plate intellectually, but I know not to put my hand on a hot plate when I do it.
Yeah,
So would you not conclude they had not experienced good?
No, they had
Because
experience.
if they hadn't had the knowledge of good and evil, and knowledge is experience, and they had not experienced good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would
But
say
good
they
was
did
just
experience
good was
good.
just the standard in the kingdom of God. But when they experienced evil, they discerned the difference between good and evil. They experienced and they came to the understanding, this is good and this is evil. But at that particular point in time, it was too late.
Yeah, I think if they've experienced the presence of God, they've experienced the blessing of God. So I would say they've experienced good. That doesn't mean they've experienced evil, because and this is part of the rabbi's dilemma. It's like, well, why would they do that? Something, and their conclusion, look at you have a limited number of conclusions. God was behind them doing this. Okay, he's pushing them along. God just says, do what you want for the next 2 seconds, Or we have to introduce a third character to make them do it, to seduce them to do it. So it's a classic issue, and so I won't be too hard on the rabbis for that, yes.
Well, this also brings us back to the question of free will. If you don't know any better, if you don't know what your choices are, then you don't have free will. You have only that which has been ordained by you to do. So in other words, God created Adam and Eve according to your story, but he didn't give them free will. He just said, don't eat this tree and do this. And so technically, so-called Lucifer gives them the opportunity to know the difference between good and evil, and therefore gave them free will. But I believe that God gave us free will. If God made us in perfection and then allowed this temptation to occur, I personally would think that he would want that to occur. And in order for us to have free will, we have to know good and evil.
Do you have free will now?
We have free will now.
Have you ever murdered anyone?
No.
So in that category, you're not free. So I think you're still confusing the choice with the ability to make the choice, and sort of inverting them. But I follow your logic, and I understand it, and that's part of the difficulty with the bigger issue. In other words, what I'm getting at is we have to decide on what our definition of free will is. Theologians do this all the time. Can I be, if I can choose to do good, and I know intellectually what it would mean to not do good, but if I only choose good, if I have a really good track record, I've never failed, I'm still free because I'm still making that choice. So there you would have a definition of free will that doesn't involve doing darkness. It just involves knowing that. And we're not going to solve this in the next 2 or 3 minutes. But you're right to bring up the free will issue, because that, in current parlance, that's where it goes. It doesn't go with injecting third characters into it. Yes, sir.
We all have missions on earth. Adam did. The reason Adam ate the apple or whatever was to get the knowledge of good and evil. He wanted to have this because he was afraid he was not going to be able to be successful in accomplishing his mission on earth. This is why fear, or Satan, told him, if you eat this thing, you'll have knowledge of good and evil. You will have sinned. He did it in order to accomplish his purpose. He was afraid he couldn't do this. Fear caused him to do it. Satan is fear.
Okay, so we still have a seduction, a temptation. The temptation. I mean, he chooses because the temptation is directly related, but it's related.
On purpose. There's nothing sneaky about it.
Believe it or not,
We agree more
Yeah,
than
one
we
more question.
disagree.
There's a problem in a lot of the definitions of good and evil that we use. Because remember that Genesis was written by a Hebrew monk before the Greco-Roman notions of arbitrary good and evil. When they're saying the knowledge of good or evil in that fruit, they're not necessarily saying the item itself was evil. Well, the item itself was good. It's subjective morals. It's God specifically told them all these trees, all these things, you may eat them, except that it's not a good or evil. It's just a commandment not to disobey your Creator.
It doesn't make morality subjective, but it makes the object.
Itself, right. So it's not that they were doing evil, they were in perfect knowledge. It was the same as if they woke up in the morning and rolled over.
Well, if your definition, when you talk about ethics and morality, there has to be a reason why X thing or X act is considered good or not good, good or evil. Okay, in the biblical story, that reason is the commandment of God. So by definition, if you disobey the commandment of God, you have committed evil. But I agree with you that the fruit was in the piece of vegetation or whatever it is incidental.
The argument was whether or not they could have known evil without eating the fruit. And so it wouldn't have mattered if they had known good or evil. It wouldn't have been an identifiable source until they were
I think that's what the gentleman in the back was saying too. I think he'd agree with you.
Are you saying that you do not think the tree in and of itself, or the knowledge of good and evil, was, you're saying that's just like a neutral thing?
He's talking about the piece of fruit. There was nothing.
Piece of fruit.
Well, whatever it was.
It was gaining knowledge. They gained knowledge, and with knowledge is accountability.
I think he's talking about the literal object itself.
The actions. The disobedience was right, but the gaining of knowledge was evil.
Gaining knowledge is a consequence.
Yeah, it's a consequence.
It's the same consequence that they had.
Don't you think God did not want them to have that knowledge?
I think God wanted them to have that knowledge, but by His own methods, His own time. I mean, what happens is, in essence, what happens is when the Nakash says, you eat of the fruit, you'll become as, most translations say, God. I would actually prefer you become as gods, knowing good and evil. The grammar is ambiguous there, but that's just my preference. But that's all it is. I think the point of that is that now, post-eating, post-disobeying, now we are like the gods of the council. We know what it is to choose well and to not choose well, because one of them, the Nakash standing right in front of him, has already experienced rebellion. And the rest of the council understands that and knows it because they've seen it happen. They may not have participated, or they may have, depending on how you take Revelation 12, where you put that back. But the Nakash was correct, okay, in that statement. This will make you like us. Okay? But I think the whole intent of being created as God's imager and as His sons and daughters, male and female, equal there, was that eventually I do want you to be like the gods, like the other Elohim I've created. I want you to be right here with them, with us. This is why in Daniel you get the Son of Man with the holy ones, with people. That's what the kingdom is. Okay, this is why in Revelation Jesus says, to him that overcomes, I will set you over the nations. Christians displace the fallen divine beings who are now in control of the other nations. This is why Paul says, don't you get it? Why are you fighting over this ridiculous lawsuit in 1 Corinthians 6? Don't you know that you will judge angels? Think of the council. Adonai, Hashem, Yahweh, the lower Elohim, the angels. You're in the mid-slot. You are over the angels. You're over the nations that they rule currently. I mean, you have what I call council motifs running through both testaments. And the whole point, this is why Revelation ends in Eden. Look at the description. The whole intent from the very beginning was to make humanity, to give them this knowledge that only the council had, that only the gods had, under the headship of Yahweh. This was the plan. And the fall, yeah, screws it up, but actually delays it and complicates it. Okay, so the Nakash substitutes the method, substitutes the timing, and the whole seduction of gnosis, as it is said in the New Testament and the Old, for that matter, because Gnosticism has Jewish roots. The whole competition, the whole point of the combat here is that on one hand, God says, you're going to be my sons. I've already called you my sons. How many times must I use this language for you to get it? Okay, this is your destiny. And the Nakash says, do you want it now? Don't wait for God to make up his mind. Don't follow what God's doing over here. I'll give it to you now. You'll be like one of us. I'm the dispenser of knowledge. I will give you this status. I will be like the Most High. I will call the shots. Okay, this is what Gnosticism at its core is. This is why Yahweh is set against the Nakash. Yeah, and when I say Gnosticism, I'm talking about later developments of Gnosticism. But the whole seduction is this. Man is tempted to take his rightful place before it was time to get it, and through the right means. Someone else, the Nakash, puts himself in the place of the planner and the executor of the plan. That was the problem in the garden. And that is the seduction from here on out through humanity. The Watchers do the same thing. You want to know what makes the universe tick? Oh, we'll tell you. All you need to do is... Oh, sure. Why do you think Satan says to Jesus, hey, I'll give you all the kingdoms of the earth? Why can he say that? Deuteronomy 32. Okay? I mean, again, you have these threads just running through both testaments, and the issue is seducing mankind with the knowledge that if he just would wake up, if he would just blink a little bit, instead of being mesmerized by the Nakash, he would, oh, I'm going to get that already. Can you offer me something I'm not going to get? Okay, but instead of doing that, it's I want it now. Okay, I'm going to give authority to you. You're going to be my ruler. You're going to be my God. It's the same old thing with the Watchers, throughout both testaments when it comes to this issue of the divine sonship of the body of Christ, as opposed to the rulers and the powers and the principalities and all these other guys. Yes.
So are you set against the idea of position of Watchers to use the information gathering?
You're talking about now?
Well, you were saying that the problem was when men accepted the offer from Watcher, Angel, Nakash, and Shepherd.
I think if you read the contactee literature, it's the same message you'll get in Genesis 3. We will tell you what runs the cosmos. We will tell you what makes it tick. We will give you knowledge that you cannot otherwise have. Well, Solomon is Solomon. Where does Solomon get his wisdom? He gets it from God. He asks, right. Right. Are you referring to the Testament of Solomon, the pseudepigraphical book?
Yeah.
No, certainly that is a. I don't want to say, how can I say this? I don't want to say I value the Old Testament testimony over that, because it's entirely conceivable to me that what the Testament of Solomon describes, Solomon could have done. Because he does go after other gods a whole lot of times.
He's using in the book of Solomon as the Old Testament book.
I would say when he commands them to a purpose consistent with the revealed will of God, I don't have a problem with that.
So if it was the will of God, the man should be judging the angels and the Watchers in the meantime. He would have to have knowledge of the people, which would mean that he was technically still.
Are we talking about Solomon, or are we talking about Adam and Eve? Because you don't have. But I don't think the parallel is a very good parallel, because you have Solomon. Solomon is in a different state post-fall, and you're trying to apply this to a pre-fall question. During fall moment, I don't see Adam using. Well, on the one hand, he doesn't get the chance, because he's in a state of corruption, post post-bite. Okay. Prior to that, there's no hint in any of the traditions, biblical or otherwise, that I'm familiar with, that Adam intended. So, yeah, I'll go along with you, but I'm going to turn the tables on you, buddy. Okay. I don't. No, what I'm saying is that even at the moment, I don't see him having the motive of Solomon in those passages. Now, I don't know the Testament of Solomon as well as I know canonical literature. I mean, I don't know if Solomon performs righteously in every episode or not. Okay. Yeah. I think that the book Testament of Solomon, by the way, is an intertestamental book. It's grouped in the pseudepigrapha. I do think there is something pre-Christian to this idea of spiritual warfare, of commanding the spirits. And again, if Solomon is being portrayed in such a manner where he's exercising his authority as God's son, singular, the king was God's son. I mean, that's in the Old Testament, which it always baffles me why Jewish people can't conceive of this idea of God having a son or God's son on earth. It's right, Psalm 45. Yeah, and most of the, this is going to sound like a slam, but it's just my experience. My experience is limited, but most of the Jewish people I know have never read anything past the Torah. I've actually had a Jewish person come up to me and ask after some session at university, ask me who Adam was. This is the person who goes to synagogue. Who's Adam? I'm like, hello? I mean, it's one of the most unbelievable questions I've ever been asked. So I don't think they'd have much familiarity with it to get beyond the point you're describing. Sure.
Put up my thoughts on the Gnostic versus the Christian view of the fall.
Well, you should say Gnostic versus Orthodox, because they're both sects of Christianity.
Yeah. Well, the biblical view is that mankind was created immortal soul and an immortal body. Right, Adam and Eve.
I would agree with that. There are people on the Orthodox side who don't think Adam was immortal. I do.
Well, I think that's what she says.
I agree.
I think Adam had what I call contingent immortality. But anyway, go ahead.
Okay, the Gnostic worldview, which really draws heavily from pagan mythology, would be that Adam and Eve were originally created, I guess, in a mortal, perhaps in an immortal body, but without a soul. And
right, the soul had to be infused.
The soul was infused through Lucifer, the knowledge of good and evil.
Is that what they
So yes, no. So the Gnostic view is that the fall is not a fall; it's actually a leap forward.
That might. Gnosticism is not a consistent tradition, so there are lots of different views of this within Gnosticism.
That's what Helena Blavatsky writes clearly.
No, that's her. If you go back to read Nag Hammadi, it's going to be Sophia, who infuses the divine spark of divinity. That's where that phrase comes from. Right. My point is, it's not Lucifer. If you're going to go reference some of the major Nag Hammadi texts.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, Lucifer's the bringer of knowledge, but humanity already has this spark of divinity in them in Gnosticism, and that's what Lucifer says that Jehovah doesn't want you to know.
Right.
So they already have it. So it's not, he's not bringing it. They already have it. But are you finished or?
What they're saying here is this very important point being brought up, or very important question being brought up, and that is that how is man to prepare for the choice of going to God or continuing to fall, or whatever you want to call it, without having the experience of that choice and having the experience of the fall? In other words, I agree with the Gnostics on the idea that Lucifer, the bringer of knowledge, had to give us the knowledge of good and evil for us to no longer be in innocence or naivety, in order for us to experience good and evil, so that we could then, by our own choice, choose God.
Right. How are we going to choose God unless we know what evil is?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. I believe that there is a God, that this God is an unseen God, and that this power of choice was his most important gift.
Yeah, I'll illustrate
and
it this way.
All of this quote unquote evil was actually part of the plan.
I think you're underestimating the human faculties given at creation. If you and I were dating, would I need to repulse you and repel you and make you hate me before I could know that I wanted to love you? Do I need that?
Maybe it wasn't his choice. Maybe it was.
Okay.
That
Well,
is the fall. The fall was that, okay, well, we understand what love is, but what is opposite of that?
right. Go back to the illustration. What I'm suggesting is you don't necessarily need an opposite or to have experienced an opposite. For instance, if you cause these feelings to well up within me, I like those feelings. Pardon the redundancy, but those feelings feel good. Okay? I like that, and I want more of that. In other words, there's that appetite there for the good, and I keep going to it. I think it would be not only illogical, but almost aberrant or unhuman to say, for me to stop one day and say, you know, in order for me to really feel this feeling again or better, I need to either hate this person or I need to make them hate me so that they can choose me like I want to choose them. It's a convoluted way of approaching what would make you gravitate towards something. And this only takes part of, in my mind, it only addresses one part of your question. The other part is more fundamental, and frankly, it does get thrown around a lot, even within conservative theological circles. There will be those who will say, and I don't necessarily have a problem with it, but I can't tell you that I'm there. But there will be those who will say that God, well, I'll use the O word, ordained this all from the beginning. Now, if I get to heaven and I find out that God ordained the fall, I will not ask for a rain check. Okay, I will live with that. And look at God and think, well, you're probably a whole lot smarter than I am. And in some way, in your mind, this fits, this is what was best to have happen. This is the way things needed to work. Okay, just because I can't grasp that doesn't mean that that is not the case. All right? Now, there are some who would take this position, and they'll use passages like Jesus Christ being slain from before the foundation of the world. In other words, the necessity of the second person of the Trinity having to die on behalf of humanity and being willing to do that. That was all before any of this was ever created. And so, in my mind, it's a very sound textual place to go for that idea. Now, it brings up sticky theological questions, which is why people either A, try to explain those verses in some other way, or B, come up with a new position and have to define or redefine terms where those verses will fit. You know, and that
Sounds better to me than
it. Let's put it this way: it sounds simpler. It sounds a lot simpler. And by the same logic, and I'm not saying that I'm a universalist either. By the same logic, though, some people are driven to universalism because if Christ is truly going to be the complete, that's an important term, but the complete, utter Redeemer of all humanity. In other words, if Satan really is going to be conclusively, utterly defeated, then all humans will be saved. Because if you lose one, Satan wins at that point. Now, there are problems with that. But some people who are on one end of the, let's just call it one end of the predestination loop or spectrum, will sort of end up on the other end because they want to see what in their minds is a complete victory. And then the question becomes is can God achieve a complete victory in his mind that doesn't involve universalism. Okay,
I don't think there's an issue of victory because I don't think that there is an adversary to begin with. That we create our own quote-unquote evil,
right.
opposite of life,
we've
in order to
had
just
this discussion.
experience that.
Let me, what time is it? Okay.
Last question, one more.
Go ahead.
I'd like to share 2 points. One, the second commandment says, don't have any fixed ideas. Think about that. If you don't have any
Don't have any fixed ideas.
that's right, that's what that commandment says. Look up in the dictionary.
Thou shalt have no other gods before me.
No fixed ideas. You think
Well,
about the definition.
I don't know what language you're reading.
Think about fixed, look it up into that, look up graven images. Graven means
Oh, you're talking about graven images.
engraved, fixed in stone, in concrete, in gold, or whatever. Fixed, okay? Images are nothing more than ideas, concepts, considerations.
But in the Old, it doesn't work in the Old Testament because the same term is used dozens, maybe hundreds of times for a thing that was constructed by hand and destroyed by hand. I mean, it doesn't just mean an idea.
Fixed ideas is what the second commandment says. It's mentioned 47 times for crying out loud. Whereas don't murder is mentioned 7 times.
If you walked up to an Israelite and you pointed to an idol and you said, "What is that?" He'd say, "That's my fixed idea."
It is.
Well, that's not
It's a
what
belief
the
system. It's a
thing.
fixed
You know,
idea. Whether it's in words,
He would say-
including the Bible,
the
or in
graven
a cow
image
that's
is
made out of
false.
gold.
It is
Or
not, that's not what
in
the second
religion.
commandment means
I'm not
at
buying
all.
it. I'm not buying it.
Oh, that's.
You think about it, you pray about it, you look up in the dictionary where the definition of graven and look up images in the dictionary.
You're applying.
We're not logic.
Listen.
Simplicity.
Simplicity is not taking one meaning of a dictionary from 10 and saying that one means all of them. That is self-styled exegesis.
He's already said in the first commandment, don't be.
Because you're dealing with real people in a real world, with using real languages. When you speak, you don't mean one thing every time you use a particular word. Your language, your communication has to be set in context. It's the same thing with what you write. What he's suggesting is that I'm going to go to the dictionary and I can find, and I'm sure you can, I can find that this Hebrew word can mean idea or fixed idea or whatever. Therefore, ergo, that means that I'm going to take that meaning to all these other passages. Okay, I just think that that's what's wrong with it. What's wrong with it is if you filled out your IRS form like that, you know and they know that what you put down here, you mean certain things by it. You're hoping, at least I would think you'd hope, that they don't get that thing and attribute an entirely different meaning to it. When you go in and get a haircut, you say, I want this, 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 and this. If your barber takes a meaning of the words you used and puts other meanings, other legitimate meanings in other contexts to what you just told them to do to your head, you might get ticked. Okay, if I go in and I go to my urologist and I say, hey, you know, I want a treatment for, or I want a vasectomy. Okay, if I get a sex change operation, I'm going to be ticked. Okay, communication works in context. We are not free, whether in verbal communication or written communication, to take any word from a semantic range, any of a semantic range for any particular word, and assign it to wherever we choose. Language, reality, doesn't work that way. And that's what he's doing.
You are presently being victimized by the very thing that God said not to do. You have fixed ideas in this area, and you can't stand it.
I'm a resident of reality.
The second commandment says don't have fixed ideas, and then God gives fixed commandments. What's your
Okay,
fixed ideas?
is this your wife? When you say, honey, I love you, okay, do you hope that she thinks that you love her like a hot dog, or that you love her that you'd give your life for it?
Maybe okay too.
Okay, so in other words, you'd give your life for a hot dog.
Why would God?
Okay, it doesn't make any sense.
Why would he say, have no God before me with the first commandment, then come in behind it and say, well, don't you worship any graven images now?
I think it's called clarity. I mean, you're correct in the one sense that behind this idol, this thing that you could kick or whatever, it's solid. I don't think that the Israelite or the pagan was dumb enough to make this and say, okay, you made me. All right, now, I think what Isaiah is talking about in those passages is they could conceptually say this thing represents a greater being, reality in your parlance. I think that's perfectly legitimate, that the graven image is not just the block of wood or stone. It represents a greater reality. And the reason I think you have two commands is that God's hitting both bases. Don't worship any other gods, and don't make any of these, because if you make these, that's going to be indicative. You're either going to be tempted to worship it and look at it and think of them, or that's just an indication of where you're already at. So I think it's a point of clarity and trying to be all-encompassing. This is what you do not do. God's redundant all the time. Hebrew parallelism. He's redundant on every page of the Psalms.
Are you intending to go to lunch right now?
If we have lunch, I don't.